Alright you guys, this is your next Q&A, and like I always say, if I didn't get you on this one, I'll try to get you on the next one. If you guys got any more questions, put them anywhere in the comment sections and we'll find them. Okay, let's get straight to it. So Big Figures 408 wants to know, why do you think there is still so much red on red, especially up in Sacramento? It looks like a lot of this younger generation are so eager to try to knock each other down and be self-destructive. Everyone is out for gain. Nobody seems to care about carnalismo anymore. What's your perspective on why and where it went wrong? And do you think it will continue to be like a wildfire and rage out of control? I think one of the main reasons why there's still so much red on red is because there's a clear lack of leadership out on the streets. I mean, there's an NF presence out there and there's active regiments, but what are they doing proactively to stop the ongoing red on red conflicts that continue to develop? More has to be done to stop it. Look at what Peter Sano Ojeda and the Mexican Mafia did to implement the no drive-by edict all over Southern California. They didn't just send out some written mandates from the SHU in Pelican Bay advising all the neighborhoods out there to stop the drive-bys. And they didn't just rely on some grave and ominous threats in the form of written filters to get their point across. They sent Sana and other highly influential MM members out there to the streets to hold court and solidify these decrees. That's a classic example of being proactive, and it was effective. The drive-by stopped almost immediately, but it took someone like Sana and other emeros who also pushed this particular edict to go out there and coordinate it on the level that they did. Think about it. When has the no red on red edict really been pushed like that in the past, besides when Cuete mentioned it in his El Norte law mandate? It was pushed during that brief period of time when he was trying to bring all the Norteño neighborhoods together, and even then, at that time, it really wasn't even technically about stopping the red on red violence. That had been a progressive problem that had been taking place for years. It was more about unifying all the Norteño hoods so that they could come together and combat the problems that were occurring behind the infiltration of Sureño neighborhoods that were migrating north. That's what it was really about. It was almost like Cuete was saying, hey, can you guys take a break for a minute so we can handle this shit? I hear you about Sacramento specifically being a problem area, but trust me, brother, the same thing was happening across the map. As far as my perspective on what I think went wrong, again, it all comes down to the NF and its shift in some of its fundamental values. When the NF took its vision to the streets and began focusing on becoming a self-solvent, self-sustaining organization, that's when everything changed. That in itself wasn't a bad thing, but it became bad when other fundamental principles were abandoned and were no longer a priority. I think another big part of it is the lack of education, and again, this all comes back to NF leadership and its priorities. No matter how you cut it, the NF is the supreme authority, and therefore it owns the brunt of accountability for things like this. Although carnalismo is spoken about, how is it really being indoctrinated? I can tell you for a fact that this isn't an area that's given a lot of attention to. Like I said, it's always mentioned, carnalismo this, carnalismo that, but the true concept of it and why it's so important isn't always passed down to the Norteños, and that's where some of the problems lie. You've also got to ask yourself this: to those of you who are active or who were once part of that lifestyle, was carnalismo something that was openly shown and embraced within the collective? I'm not talking about glimpses of it. I'm talking about true carnalismo, shown by way both of actions and words. So Ryan Todd wants to know, what you said about Mendocino County and Humboldt County is very true. It would be dangerous, to say the least, for a new criminal element to try to set up shop in those places. They are old school tight communities and have no problem burying problems. Yes sir, I learned this from experience. I'll tell you like this: those communities might be small and they might be behind as far as street savviness, but when it comes to moving into their territory, they're on their shit. During my first go around out in Ukiah, I learned the hard way and almost picked up my third strike. Within 2 weeks of paroling out there, I moved too fast trying to tap into some of the resources, and I brought too much attention on myself. This caused the local cops and some of the people out there in the community to start watching me. I remember the first time Mexican Mike from Oakland drove out there to see me so we could sit down and discuss business. This was in 1999. Eminem drove out there in a brand new 1999 Mercedes-Benz with 24-inch rims. The cars his boys drove out there in were just as flashy, and I could tell they were getting just as much attention. Like I said, when it came to street smarts, Ukiah was definitely behind the curve. But when it came to taking care of its own, Ukiah was one of those small rural towns that stuck together. Don't get me wrong, I was eventually able to accomplish what I was trying to do out there, but it just took time, and I learned early on that I had to move with a certain level of caution, that I couldn't just go out there and start regulating. So the Martin 9400 wants to know, back in 1991, how difficult was it to be made an NR member? Did you have the status to make your homeboy Joe from the mission an NR member? Had he been pulled into the NR, would the situation have been squashed as his cellie would have been considered peers? Also, are there ever cases where someone is deemed a coward for claiming that a fellow Norteño is an immediate threat to them? That's a good question. Back in 1991, this was close to the time when I was recruited in 1989, and I can tell you now that it was completely different. It's nothing like it is now. When they say the game's been watered down, that's an understatement. Let me just say this. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, it was a big thing to be recruited into the NR. It meant something. If you were embraced as a hermano, you felt like you had accomplished something. And there was a long screening and vetting process to it. It wasn't done how it is now, where someone expresses an interest in making a commitment, and then he's just inducted in by someone who claims to have the authority of recruitment. It's not taken serious anymore, and there's no more discretion being used when seeking out new prospects. When I was brought in, there was a level of secrecy about it that made it feel like I was being exposed to something sacred, something that was held in high regard by everyone who was involved, and something that the brothers were taking serious. I had to go through a 90-day probationary period, and I was only exposed to small sections of the bonds at that time. Even the bonds were kept in secrecy. Back then, if you were to read the bonds, it was considered a big thing. So Vic 323 wants to know, I just recently heard someone on another channel say that they were retired from the NF, that they weren't considered a dropout, and that they had put their time in. Is this how it works? Does the NF allow you to walk away after so many years of dedicated service and thereafter consider you an honorable former member who is not considered a DO? Man, I know exactly who you're talking about, and I heard the comment that you're alluding to. Listen, let me try to simplify this without spending too much time on it, because it's really not that complicated. Those are outright self-serving, frivolous claims. That individual is just trying to save face and lead people to believe that he's still legendary. Again, in order to be legendary, people need to have heard about you first. But if he really believes that, then I guess the only way to really shake him out of that self-induced trance he's in is to just put him out there on an active yard so he can get that reality check himself. I'd love to see that one. In the terms that he described, no, there is no retirement. No, you don't just get to walk away and do your own thing after putting in so many years of dedicated service. And no, again, in those terms, you're not looked at as someone who's still in good standings. If you listen to the guy's story early on when he first came onto YouTube, he tells you himself that he became a familiano in the 70s and then dropped out in the 70s. That's not what I would consider a worthy career to be proud of. But the bigger point is, even if the NF was handing out retirements or semi-retirements, it sure wasn't for dudes who were a part of it for 6, 7, or 8 years. Who retires after 7 years? And just so you guys know, I'm not sure what his understanding of semi-retirement is, but he seems to either be misinformed or this is just another one of his fibs. The NF's definition of semi-retirement that used to be one of the many subdivisions that was outlined in the Constitution was clear. No familiano would ever be able to just walk away from the familia and go on to live a life of his own choosing. Once you became a member, you are a member for life, period. All semi-retirement is this. Once you reach an age where your physical capacity has diminished to a level of where you're no longer physically capable of performing some of the physical activities that some of the younger C's are obligated to perform, you are placed in a modified role that will limit your physical activities. That's all it is. Other than that, You still function, you're still part of the collective, and you're still involved daily. All this malarkey about I put my time in is a bunch of horse feathers. Snap out of it. You don't set the terms. This is just a little bit of arrogance and delirium all packed together that's again part of this guy's justification for moving the way he is. We're not all dummies. There's some of us that know better. Like I've said before, what you have here is someone who's just trying to convince the YouTube community that he's still in good standings, that he's a righteous stand-up individual, and that he's not like the rest of the guys on YouTube that are self-admitted dropouts. Or like the guys who cut off his water, booted him off their channel, turned their backs on him, and made him look like the sad little puppy that he is. Eventually, they even came to realize that he was a fraud. He even said, "I ain't a dropout. People should be scared of me." Stop it, boy. Yes, you are a dropout who's in denial. And why should anyone fear you? Because you're a legend in your own mind? The fact that people don't fear you should tell you right there what people really think about you. I'll just say this. For me, what personally turns me down about some of these cats that jump out there with all these fabricated stories is when they lie, embellish, and start telling all these enamored stories about themselves. I don't respect that. But you guys can do your own research and vet out the frauds yourself. All you have to do is ask people and they'll tell you. All those stories about killing this, killing that, being this vicious, legendary Pinto who garnered the attention of the entire prison system, being a founder, is nothing more than a self-scripted rendition manufactured for his own ego. There's a couple individuals from that era who I spoke to about all this, and when I asked if some of the claims that this dude was making were true, you want to know what the response was? After they stopped laughing, I was told, "Come on, man, what do you think?" So what does that tell you? The other big whopper that this guy likes to tell is that he got clearance to write his book. I know you guys really ain't believing this one, right? I can tell you now that the NF is a very secretive, low-profile organization that doesn't like its business out there at all. This is an organization that's always shrouded itself in secrecy, so anyone who claims that the NF gave them permission to write a book about it, or that it's okay to be on YouTube flapping their jibs, is straight lying. Anyone who is active wouldn't and couldn't be doing that. So Mike Long, I ain't gonna let you get me, boy. So Mike Long wants to know, how strong are the regiments in San Francisco, Oakland, and the Bay Area? I saw Norteños in Crescent City, Redding, California, and Corning. Did you ever hear of regiments up north like that, or regiments in Oregon? What was the most annoying essay you ever had to write? In the early 90s, I functioned in the Frisco Regiment, and back then, that regiment was strong. Keep in mind, things were a lot different back in those days too. Eddie Little Rocha Roche and Willie Dreamer Fernandez were in charge of that regiment for a while, until both of these guys were charged with a double homicide involving Federico Arvelo and Barry San Jose. The East Bay, Oakland, Hayward, Decoto, Pittsburgh, and Vallejo are other East Bay regiments that were also strong out there. So Anonymous wants to know, when you became a made member of the NF, do you get to run your own crew of Norteños, or you just basically a foot soldier for the gang? Like if a regiment has 30 members, does each member have their own little crew of Norteños under them? No, it doesn't work like that, homie. When you become a familiano, it's not like you're automatically delegated a crew of Norteños to work under you as part of your recruitment process. Or it's not like you've automatically somehow earned this right as part of your induction. These things come later. You've already proven your ability to be an effective leader, and you've already proven your loyalty to an extent. That's why you were sought out. But you're technically still unproven within the organization, and you have to earn all these things over again. As a new recruit, your whole objective is to study the Constitution, the NF history, and to just absorb as much education as possible. This is the indoctrination phase. Once you begin to develop seasoning and you begin to gain more confidence amongst leadership, then you'll eventually be appointed to hold down small positions such as regimental commander, either inside or outside of prison. As far as compartmentalizing a 30-man regiment with multiple C's in the context you put it in, I understand the question as you asked it, but I don't think it's done in the context you put it in. If there's multiple C's functioning in the same regiment, they're not automatically delegated a small crew to fall under their direct authority just based on the fact that they're C's. They fall in line just like everyone else. Now, if the appointed RC decides to make certain C's in that regiment squad leaders, and he sees the need to have it like that, then that's his call. If the regiment is a bigger regiment with 25 to 30 members in it, then this is more than likely how it's going to be set up. It would be the equivalent of running a corporation. One person doesn't run everything. You have buffers, second in commands, or other people in the chain who assist with leadership responsibilities. That's how I do it, and I say that from experience. It gets a little overwhelming trying to maintain an entire 30-man regiment yourself, so delegating out some of that responsibility definitely helps. So Captain 9987 wants to know, your channel is by far one of the best channels out there, and yours and Sandman's work ethic is what makes the difference. Have you seen some of the other videos that are being put out there and how far some of these YouTubers are willing to go in order to create new videos? Foremost, I appreciate the compliment and for recognizing all the efforts that me and Sandman have been putting into our work, because we really have been trying to step up our game. I had a long pep talk with Sandman and a few other people who are all part of the PMM team, and I let them all know that PMN's sole objective for 2022 is to improve both our channels all the way around, from better thumbnails, better content, a better look, new intros, better video production, better graphics, transitions, and animations. There's a couple new channels out there that I'm trying to emulate that seem to be doing everything right. So that's the goal right now. As far as whether or not I've seen some of the content that others have been putting out there, to be honest with you, I'm so busy working on my own content that I rarely have time to go look at what other channels have been putting out there. But occasionally, either Sandman or some of the viewers will send me a link or a video showing me some of the content that's been dropped. Let me just say this, I'm embarrassed for some of these cats who are stooping as low as they have and who are doing whatever it takes to get a view. Are you kidding me? Showing people you can loosen up your collar and be one of the fellas is one thing. Showing people that you're not one of them super serio cats who's always portraying that tough guy image is also cool. But I don't even know what to think about some of the shit I've been seeing. To each his own, man. So JD wants to know, would the NF and Bulldogs ever work together again and put their past behind them and have an alliance? Already heard they programming together in the feds. In my opinion, I don't think it will ever happen, and that's an unfortunate thing. I've always been a big supporter of Fresno, and I've always advocated for finding ways to end the conflict, but my voice was only one amongst many others, all of which were not beating to the same drum. Too much has happened, and there's been too much bad blood since this rift has developed. It was bad enough that Fresno and the NF had decided to stand on different sides of the battlefield. The issues already ran deep, and a lot of it was seated on betrayal, or the sense of having felt like there were serious levels of betrayal by both sides. But I think it transcended beyond a point of no return when Fresno decided to ally up with the ME in the late 90s. This is when the betrayal probably ran as deep as it could possibly get. Everything comes back to leadership, and again, I think one of the main reasons why these bridges won't be mended is because the NF doesn't have the type of leadership out there on these main lines that's going to pursue ways to fix the ongoing issues that exist with Fresno. As far as the federal system goes, the politics are different over there, but if you got some of the same NF leadership in federal prison that were at war with Fresno in the state system, you got to ask yourself, why are things different? Because at the end of the day, C's like Skip, Corny, Pinky, Tibbs, and others understood that it wasn't in their best interest to push that war in the federal system or to allow it to spill over from one system into the other. They learned early on that they needed Fresno, or at the very least, that Fresno could benefit them. So Birdo wants to know, who does MS-13 run with in the feds? Are they even a factor, or are the feds using them as scapegoats for the lockdown? MS-13 has small alliances in the federal prison system, but for the most part, they run with themselves. A lot of the smaller gangs run with each other, but MS-13 is one of the bigger gangs, and they're definitely a factor in the federal system. So the fact that they called a nationwide lockdown because of MS-13's involvement ain't no fluke. They're considered to be a major threat within the federal prison system, and if you remember last year, I don't think they slammed down the entire federal system, but they slammed down a couple FCIs across the country where they had a heavy presence of MS-13s housed. And the whole reason behind it was because they were anticipating retribution. So Zom Kill Flores wants to know, can you cover on Chuka's son Johnny from Salinas? There's a documentary that says he was allowed to walk away without retribution due to his heavy horsepower as an NFer. True? Heavy horsepower. I know what you mean though. I seen this episode that you made reference to about Johnny being allowed to walk away from the organization without retribution due to his high standings and respect as an NF member. Let me just say this. There's all kinds of things wrong with this. For one, that just simply isn't true. Nobody's ever allowed to just walk away from an organization, regardless of your rank, status, or your standings within the organization. I think we've all seen the proof in the past with other high-seated C's like Robert Brown Bob Viramontes, Michael Castillo, and James Tibbs Morado all being hit. In fact, some of those hits were effectuated for this purpose, to send that exact message that no one within this organization is above being hit or is exempt to the laws of the familia. Something else that was wrong with the story that was depicted in this documentary is that Johnny was not an NF member. Johnny was just a solid N who was functioning with the Salinas Regiment. I know this because I was personally involved in this situation myself. For those of you who read my book, if you recall, the conversation that he alludes to about his mom cooperating and about being confronted by 3 NF members, that took place at my house in Ukiah. Robert Chico Rose and Gabe Money G Caracheo brought him out there for this sole purpose. We pressed him about it that day, got him to be clear about his position on it, and then after this, he disappeared. About a week later, I got a call from Chico advising me that Johnny and his mom had basically fallen off the map and that they were nowhere to be found. Apparently, he had a change of heart following our conversation and from the time he left my house that day. So Rojo 650 wants to know, did you ever try to assist in establishing a regiment in the 650? No, I never was involved or assisted with trying to establish a regiment in the 650. But being that it's so close in proximity to the city, you can pretty much say that 650 was part of the city's regiment. In fact, I lived in Daly City for most of the time I was assigned to the RC position over the city, and a lot of my resources came from the 650 in South City. So the Martin 9400 again wants to know, how long did it take for you to come to terms with the deaths of the most significant women in your life? When I heard you read that chapter of your book, you took me back behind those walls. Personally, I think losing a loved one while incarcerated is a bigger fear than losing one's own life in prison. Simply put, it was rough, brother. I think one of the biggest fears that we all have when we get incarcerated is to lose loved ones or just having to deal with the very real possibility that we might not get to see some of them again. It's a tough reality to deal with, but it's a reality you always have to be cognizant about. Speaking for myself, I started doing so much time behind the walls that it was almost like I started to lose track of time, and I began to think that that world out there just stopped along with my world. Because when we get locked up, in a sense, the concept of time seems to stop for us, or at least we think it does. We assume that just because our world has stopped spinning, everyone else's has stopped too. But that's not the case. Life goes on out there, with or without us. And unfortunately for me, these reminders sometimes came in the form of losing a loved one. I guess this was reality's way of telling me that time didn't stop and that the world out there continued to keep moving. You asked specifically about my situation, where I basically lost all the women in my life that meant anything to me during the 10 years I spent at the Santa Clara County Jail. Yeah, brother, I was devastated to say the least. I lost my wife, my mom, and then my grandmother, all back to back. Having to endure that type of adversity or those type of losses on its own is one thing, but having to deal with it at a time when my life was also hanging in the balance, when I was also dealing with the adversity regarding my status, and then just having to accept the fact that I couldn't be there was tough. Because I was looking at my third strike and I was technically looking at life, they wouldn't allow me to go to any of the funerals. And that was one of the things about it that bothered me the most. Because once they were gone, that was it. They were just gone. I'm sure some of you have gotten an unexpected visit from the jail or prison chaplain, and I'm sure you'd agree that this was and is the worst place to hear about losing a loved one. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But like you said, the Martin 9400, while incarcerated, the fear of losing a loved one is often a bigger fear you have than losing your own life. So Jacob Perez wants to know my respect. Life is a journey, and if you are able to save one youngster from that lifestyle, your defection was worth it. Most definitely, Jacob. Hopefully I've already accomplished this goal already, but either way, I'm going to continue doing what I do for as long as I'm able. So Luis Martinez wants to know, how many ex-NF members do you still keep in touch with? A few, probably around 5, and they're all success stories. They're all clean, they're all employed, and they're all in a better place in life. I've seen them all struggle from the time that they made that transition until where they are today, and it's inspiring to see how they've all progressed. One is running his own company, and it's a thriving business in a competitive market. Another one got himself employed in a job that installs high-tech fiber optic underground cables. He's not only making $60 an hour, but he's also elevated himself within the company and has a management position. And since he's been home for about 10 years now, he's added 3 more kids to his growing little baseball team. It's always good to get pictures of him and his kids during the holidays. Not only because it's good to see him enjoying fatherhood, but just because I've come to see him come a long way since we were active. The others are all working, they're clean, they've all settled into relationships, and not once have any of them ever looked back or got in trouble since. It's almost like they've gotten older now, and that all the years of incarceration and all the years of getting into trouble are just past phases that they went through in life. But what's even more of a trip is that I'm actually in touch with more active NF members than non-active. And that's not because I'm trying to be active or no dumb shit like that. What it is this. Regardless of our past political beliefs and regardless to how things are supposed to be, the bonds that we forged years ago have remained intact and have even overcame the test of time. When you've been deep in the trenches with someone and you've had each other's backs during some serious life and death situations, that's something you never forget. When you've ran with someone and you guys have been in some sticky situations and you know that they really had your back, those kinds of relationships endure everything. So Crystal Barrientos wants to know, how do you determine who needs to use a weapon on someone? Whose turn is it to participate in a stabbing other than someone who got in trouble and has to do cleanup? That's a good question. There's a lot of different variables that come into play when these types of decisions are made. And as the regimental commander, it's my job to make them. Who the target is, his physical stature. This is taken into consideration because I wouldn't want to send an inexperienced N to hit a well-known target who I know is going to fight back. Someone who we've trained and groomed. Because I've seen an inexperienced N go to hit a bona fide DO only to have the weapon taken from him and in turn get stabbed with his own weapon. The threat level, what ethnicity the target is, because if he's of a different ethnicity group, I would have to implement countermeasures placing security on all those others from his same ethnic group out of an abundance of caution in the event they try to intervene. Whether or not he has relatives or someone else in there that might try to come to his aid, who's working that unit, if there's any blind spots, because the objective is to always get away undetected, who the hitter is, who the bombers are, and like you said, what kind of weapon is going to be used, and who owes cleanup. These are all things that must be decided and taken into consideration. For those of you that don't know what cleanup is, it's basically a disciplinary sanction that is passed down to someone for violating a rule or a policy. In other words, if you fuck up, you're going to be the next one in line to go stab someone. There's a lot of other things that come into play as well, but these are some of the main things that are taken into consideration. The other thing I can tell you is this. It's always mandatory to use a weapon off the top. We don't engage in hands-on removals. As far as what weapon would be used, whenever there's an NF member overseeing the household, 9 times out of 10, they're going to mandate that a stabbing instrument is used. Always. NF members prefer bone crushers. NR members prefer slashing weapons. Their signature weapon is the tomahawk. That's usually how things are determined. For From that point on, it's up to the hitter to play off the element of surprise and to initiate the stabbing whenever he sees fit. He usually walk up to the target and engage in some small talk to get him comfortable. This is called rocking the baby to sleep. When the target drops his guard by either looking away or placing himself in a vulnerable position, that's when the hitter will initiate the hit. Once he's concluded hitting the target, his objective is then to make his exit strategy, and if at all possible, to get away undetected. This is when the bombers come in and do their part. The two assigned bombers will then come in and commence the assault by bombing on the target until the target is either completely immobilized or until they feel like their part is done. So the Martin 9400 again wants to know, when you were on mainline or in reception, how often were youngsters given a leadership position? Is this common practice or something that's only done as a last resort? How old was the youngest individual that proved he was more than qualified of the position? Did any unqualified youngsters almost cause a wreck by letting their status go to their head? Believe it or not, it happens a lot. Youngsters were always being placed in leadership positions, and the fact that this happened as much as it did and as frequently as it did, it only continued to cause ongoing problems for several reasons. Not just because they would be inexperienced and underqualified to maintain the position, but also because it always caused a lot of friction between some of the older guys and some of the youngsters who were barking orders. A lot of it had to do with egos, but can you imagine being in your late 30s, 40s, and 50s, being someone of strong will and character, and then coming into a county jail or a prison only to have some 20-year-old kid trying to dictate your program? A lot of older guys have problems being receptive to that or embracing it on any level. And it's not like these youngsters are considerate of this either. A lot of this younger generation have egos and chips on their shoulders as well. Imagine coming into the county jail and a little 19-year-old tier security telling you to start sending any of your personal mail to him so that it can be screened. Or just telling you that you need to comply with something or else you're going to face some type of serious repercussion. This goes into the second part of your question. It causes wrecks all the time. Either the youngster will end up causing so much friction and animosity that it discourages some of these guys to the point of them walking away, or the youngster ends up getting in trouble at some point because of his blatant indiscretions. I know a lot of people will say that if someone's skin is that thin to where they'll actually allow themselves to be driven off behind some bullheaded youngster, then let them go. I understand this line of thinking, but where's the carnalismo? At what point do you proactively do something to fix the problem and prevent it from happening, opposed to allowing it to continue to be a problem? As raza, we're a proud race. The Mexicano bloodline is one of the many strong bloodlines that's out there, and it's always prided itself on being stand-up people who are more than willing to fight and challenge or push back against any form of oppression, no matter how big or small it may be. So yeah, brother, it's a big problem right now. So Santana Diaz wants to know, Phillip sparked Parole last month to Modesto. Is he still active? In your book, you mentioned Jermaine Gonzalez, aka Gonzo from Livermore. What type of C was he? Was he with the business, and why did he drop out? Since the feds and state are going to reconcile their differences, does that mean Chuco and Conejo will be cleared as well? Or will they be the ones deemed since they were the renegades who created the division? I don't see Skip and Corny forgiving those two individuals. Let me answer the last part of that because I don't think I covered it. No, Skip and Corny ain't gonna forgive that. Trust me on that. As far as Chuco and Conejo, I very much doubt that they're gonna be cleared. When it's all over and done with, those who were renegades, those who caused a lot of the friction between the state and the Fed factions, they're gonna get dealt with. Just trust me on that. As to the rest of your question, to be 100% honest with you, I can't give you a definitive answer on his status, talking about Sparks, one way or the other. If I did, I'd be lying. I believe he's still active, but don't quote me on that. As far as Jermaine Gonzo Gonzalez, I'm not sure why he dropped out. I heard he got himself in hot water for going MIA and not staying in touch with his channel, but I'm not completely sure about him either. You asked what kind of C he was and whether or not he was with the business. Listen, Gonzo was my boy. I had a lot of love for the guy, but in my opinion, I believe he never should have been pulled. It has nothing to do with him not having the qualities or the characteristics of a C. I just don't think he was ready, and I think for him at the time, it had more to do with carrying the title. Here's an example of how Gonzo was out there. So when we were in Quinton, myself, Smokey, Nagoya, and Chewy, both from Frisco, and a couple of other C's all made plans to link up and network. I called Gonzo and told him that we were getting ready to strike through and to get ready for us to pick him up. When we got there, he was standing outside without a shirt and he was double-fisted with 2 pints of Hennessy. Gonzo was caught up in that whole image and personification of being an NF member. At the time, that's all it was for him. He was ready to ride, and that part of it was there, but he completely lacked any leadership abilities, and this is as equally important, if not more. The other thing he lacked was business acumen. I tried to network with him and basically gave him free reign to lay out his own blueprint, but he couldn't do it. Again, Gonzo's my boy, and I'm not casting any negative aspersions on him, but you asked and I gave you an honest opinion about him. He just wasn't ready at the time. There's no question in my mind that he would have eventually developed into the type of prospect that I used to seek out back then, because he was an up-and-coming NR member. However, I just think that he should have been made to wait until he was ready. If I recall, Bobby Silencio Lopez on death row was the one who recruited him, and he couldn't indoctrinate him the way he was supposed to because of the logistics and how it was done. You can only pass down so much glesha when it's done exclusively on paper, and that's how Silencio did it with him. I hope you guys have enjoyed this Q&A. It took a little longer than expected to get this out, but it finally got done nonetheless. We have another profile coming out this week, so stay posted for that. And again, it looks like YouTube's notifications and the speed of them processing videos is getting better. But keep in line with our community page, as we'll be utilizing this to notify you guys of our own release times. With that said, again, we appreciate all the support you guys have been showing us, because as I've always said, without you guys, we would cease to exist.